Greetings to everyone. Welcome to another webinar within the HBCU's Educate with Dr. K series, spring 2021. Just some logistics. We are recording this, of course. We have a great panel of educators and professionals today. I'm just going to give you all a little bit more time to get on in the room before we officially get started. You do have access to the chat, so feel free to put your questions or thoughts or comments in that, and also utilize the Q&A section to put any questions that you may have for our panelists. We will have a Q&A at the end of the discussion, but you don't have to wait to the end to post your questions. So we're going to start in about 1 to 2 minutes. We have some panelists that's still trying to get on. We understand technology, but we're going to start shortly. Welcome, welcome to those that are just tuning in. I'm just waiting for one more panelist to get in the room. So as we're waiting for those that are in attendance, if you can kind of put in the chat where you are coming from, that'd be great to see who we have in the room. Let's see, who do we have in the room today? We have Norfolk State. Kudos to Norfolk State because I am born and raised in Virginia. So definitely know about Norfolk State. Welcome. Who else do we have in the room? And we're going to start momentarily. We see some behold in the space. Okay. Welcome, welcome. As soon as we get our last panelist in, we will get started. All right. Anyone else? Oops. Anyone else representing a HBCU, whether you work at one now or attended one or one that you support? Okay, we got another Norfolk. Okay, is this Professional Development Day at Norfolk State? Glad that you are here. Glad that you are here. Let's see, do we have all of our panelists in? Okay. Okay. All right, our panelists are coming in now, so we will get started shortly. All right. Look at my panelist screen. Okay. All right, so as our panelists are coming in, because I want to be mindful of time. Today's webinar is focused on accessibility services and student engagement. I am extremely excited about this discussion because it's a topic that across the board, at least in my space in assessment, we don't talk enough about. And so even within the HBCU space, and so I have the privilege of meeting with the panelists to prep, and we had a great discussion, and I hope that they bring that same energy today to you all to talk about this needed topic of accessibility services and student engagement. As always, we want to give honor to our historically Black colleges and universities, honoring the foundation, the legacy, definitely honoring Cheyney University out in Pennsylvania, that 1837, being one of the first HBCUs to be founded. And so definitely want to give honor to them. And so now I have the privilege of introducing our panelists. Some are still coming on, I see, so we may not see them for another minute or two, but once again, I want to give honor to your time. So we want to recognize Tiffany Tuma, who is the current Assistant Dean for the Center for Academic Success and Accessible Education at St. Augustine University. She's an experienced higher education professional with 10 years of experience in various areas such as enrollment management, student affairs, and now academic affairs. Mrs. Tuma serves once again as the Assistant Dean for the Center of Academic Success and Accessible Education, as well as the Title IX Coordinator at St. Augustine University, which is located in Raleigh, North Carolina. Which, once again, she notes that it is known as the Miracle on Oakwood Avenue and the Soul of South Raleigh. Tiffany believes that student success is achieved by assisting students in a holistic manner and by building a co-curricular bridge between academic affairs and student affairs. Tiffany Tuma is currently a doctoral candidate in the executive PhD program studying urban higher education at Jackson State University in Jackson, Mississippi. I love. Mrs. Tuma is also a devoted wife and loving mother. So welcome, Ms. Tuma. Next, we have Dr. Giovanni Felix, who currently serves as the Associate Vice Chancellor and Chief of Staff at North Carolina Central University. I won't hold that against you since I'm at A&T and you're down the road. But he has more than 20 years of experience in program implementation, university admissions policies, retention strategies, grant writing, reading, management, recruitment, program planning, personnel management, marketing, and program evaluation in large and small university settings. Wow. Dr. Giovanni has additional experience in consultation regarding ADA and 504 regulations, grant writing, program development, and evaluation through nonprofit organizations. He also has experience in distance learning environments and information management. Dr. Felix also serves as the chair of the Enable Association and the Agency for Access and Development. So welcome, Dr. Felix. And last, we have Lori Davis Esquire, who is the CEO and Chief Navigator of Mortarboard and Tassel Collegiate Consultant LLC. MTCC is an all-inclusive expertise for college planning, career coaching, and educational consulting services. The primary focus of this consultancy is upon assisting aspiring and current students of all ages to attain their higher education and career goals. MTCC also supports college and career readiness initiatives of educational institutions and nonprofit organizations. And as an attorney, Lori has over a decade of senior level higher education experience encompassing collegiate teaching, governmental affairs, legal affairs, and student affairs. Lori currently serves as business and employment law instructor at Midway University, a private liberal arts institution in Kentucky. Welcome, Lori, to the webinar. And so I'm glad to see you. So I noticed on your screen, you may want to change your name on the screen so it reflects you if you can. I don't see Mrs. Tuma. She was on here. Maybe she got kicked off and will join us shortly.
Thank you so much.
Yes. But as we wait for Tiffany to come in, we want to get the discussion started. And so let's start off with the basic. what is accessibility services and what is this language around what it means to have accessibility services on college campuses?
Dr. Felix, would you like to take that?
Actually, Attorney Davis, you did a great textbook definition yesterday, or the day before. And that was off the top of your head, so I would defer to you.
Well, that's very generous. Let's see if I can remember that. Accessibility services is what we are utilizing for students who happen to have some form of disability, and we generally refer to those as learning differences and or health condition that impacts their ability to learn, or one significantly impacts their ability to conduct a major life function. And so what we do on college campuses, if you're unaware already, is that we provide accommodations and support to those students based upon their diagnosis and their needs.
That's a good book definition, definitely. So how can you break that down for us that don't speak to a lot of those terms that you mentioned, just like the lay public, what it is?
So if there's a person who is a student on one of our campuses and has a disability and they need assistance, is really the crux of it. If they need assistance and they need to be able to have an accommodation such as extended time, or if they need more time to finish an assignment based upon a limitation that they may have a limitation in terms of writing. Right. And so those are the types of accommodations that the accessibility offices actually provide. Accessibility is the more generalized format that we use. Many people may be more familiar with the term disability, though as we are moving through the DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion space, we're thinking more along the lines of talking about what is wrong with the environment as opposed to what might be perceived as wrong with an individual. And so accessibility is really what we're hoping to accomplish for not only students with disabilities, but also every student who touches one of our campuses. And so that is why more colleges are moving towards the accessibility language.
I love that, especially this whole idea of what is perceived of a student versus the environment of the campus, and how that you have to know the difference and how you're rendering those services. So can you all talk, anyone, more about the language? And so I know from my experiences, this whole idea of people first language. And so can you all speak to that and what that means?
Sure. Well, when it comes to language and accessibility, there's been a lot of change. You have a lot of disability services out there, right? And as Attorney Davis mentioned, we're moving towards saying accessible. There are some things that are kind of already imprinted in our minds when we think of this population. So one of the things is, and we briefly talked about it when we prepped for this, but accessibility, typically when we were marginalizing students by just claiming them to be disability services, when we think of access in higher ed, right, we are thinking about a lot of different programs in terms of access for first generation low income students. Right. By kind of going to the accessibility language, we are now being able to group those individuals into that same arena. So now for a lot of different rooms where access was to be talking about reducing the cost for individuals with low income, right? So now students with disabilities are now being automatically included, and now typically you'll see that on a campus, they're now also being included in sense of when we're doing some planning, we're now thinking about this population, right? So use COVID, for example. So I know for our campus, when we were planning for COVID last spring, it was a mad dash, right? So first thing we're thinking about access. We're thinking about, oh my goodness, our low income students, we're sending them home. Do they have access to be able to have an internet connection so they can get on? Do they have access for a computer? Well, it automatically included like our students with disabilities. Like, hey, is our material going to be ADA friendly? Do we have to now go back and make sure that all of our professors are caught up and able to take their on-campus teaching and put an online module that's universally accessible, right? So what I've seen is those populations and those people who champion certain different populations by saying accessible, it automatically includes all of our students who have a disability by just that kind of focus. And you see it nationally, you'll see a lot of people change their names, and specifically for that reason. It's because it is an access issue, right? It's not about what their actual difference learning ability is.
Right.
It's about having access to the same material that any other student would have.
Yeah, and I think you brought a good point in terms of college access and how what we're experiencing in COVID has really just broadened what that really means and what that looks like, and how we are being on notice of those students that we weren't not really paying attention to as a whole in regards to the access and the needs and the services that they require now because of what's going on. So thank you for bringing up that good point. Any other thoughts around the language as it relates to accessibility services?
Dr. K, so first I just want to apologize to you and the colleagues and the guests for my technical issues, but not sure if this has been said already, but just to add to what Dr. Felix said about the proper language, I think we were used to saying a disabled person versus a person with a disability.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as time changes, we shouldn't just make it the norm, but it's just being more human, because even if you have some type of physical, mental, or learning challenge, you're still human. So we don't want to emphasize the disability. So just disabled person versus a person with a disability. And then also one of my jobs at St. Aug when I first came on board was changing the term or the name of our office from disability services to accessibility service, because those persons do not have disabilities, but we want to make sure that everybody has access to all of the services.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Now, you kind of hit on some of this, but what are some of the accommodations offered at either your institutions or typically on college campuses beyond maybe what the lay public may think to learning services?
Well, I'll start, I suppose. I think some of the accommodations are for individuals who might have a health need, such as a student who has diabetes. Sometimes they may need to have a drink or some food with them so that they don't go into a diabetic shock. And there are some instructors who would prefer that the class rule be that there are no food or drink in the classroom. And so that can be one of the accommodations that can be utilized for that health condition. Also, some diabetic students also have an alarm that might alert them as to their increase in blood sugar. And that will clearly clue that person and anyone around that person that they're having a need for to take intake of food or drink to stave off that level of increased diabetic emergency.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one that I think is not typically known to those who are not in the space.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking, when I was in classes and how you will see those signs or in the syllabus or something that says no drinks are allowed in this room. And I never would have thought to think about those students that may have diabetes and how that impacts them in the classroom. So thank you for bringing that up. What are some other accommodations that are offered to students that they may not know?
Well, you have the standard, extended time, sometimes a proctor who might read a test to a student who has maybe some reading issues. You have one great thing is with technology, you have a host of technologies that are more readily available and cheaper that also not only are for use for students, but also mitigate the actual parent that they actually have a disability in classroom. For example, I was actually talking to a graduate student yesterday who's putting his accommodations, and we were talking about it, and I was telling him like, hey, do you use speech to text software or text to speech, so that basically he prefers auditory to be able to hear whatever he's reading. And he's like, yeah. I said, so do you go and get that done by your professor? He's like, no. He's like, all the Google suites do it, and a lot of other suites do it now automatically. Which the process used to be, technically you'd have to get a book. You'd have to actually have a accessibility services. People go in and request it in a PDF format or audio format. So there's a lot of things, recording lectures. There's a lot of software out there. We use one where it'll record any lecture, any kind of audio, where a student can annotate it, and it's used for people who have learning disabilities, some reading disabilities, and even some writing disabilities. So there's a whole suite of things that are available that students aren't even aware are available for them. So it's very interesting. I think a lot of accessibility services are really going into the assistive technology awareness part too.
Mm-hmm.
And also not only for the students themselves, but that also means training teachers to be able to present that too. So there's a lot. I think the one that, and I would say not, and I think this maybe part of the question, the one that was glaring to me, that might be in the whole question of cost. Some of the technology or old school technology has a really big cost to it. So, to get an interpreter, right? But in the age of COVID, let's say if a student is attending, they can get, that cost can be mitigated quite easily by having the audio in place. But physical place to place, those are things that, so I think I changed the question. I think I was talking about surprising how the cost can be a big hindrance in terms of, so I would say most people aren't really understanding how much it really costs to put some of these things in place for students with disabilities.
Right. Yeah. And for our institutions and many smaller institutions in terms of funding and the lack of funding or, physical needs will be measured against what accommodations you can actually provide. Right. So thank you for bringing up that note in terms of cost and funding. What about you, Mrs. Tuma?
So Dr. Felix hit on a few, and it is, student by student basis, and resources, fiscal resources definitely plays a part. For my student population, majority of our accommodations are extended time on tests and quizzes, extended time on assignments, testing at a separate facility. They would go just a little ways across campus to the testing center so that they can have a quiet space to be able to take those tests or quizzes. But I'll just put my institution on the spot. We can do a better job at providing accommodations for those who are visually or hearing impaired. Even though we do not have any students that require those accommodations, I feel that it's better for institutions to have them and not need them, and then for a student to apply and need those services and they are not in place. So I just think that our institutions need to set aside or earmark funds for those types of accommodations. And even in the midst of the pandemic with COVID, we've seen a surge of accommodations. I'm not sure if these students did not utilize services prior, or because of COVID and the stress and other things going on in life that they are now needing accommodations, we are definitely seeing a surge of more time on tests and quizzes. And also we have an accommodation where they can be excused from class, whether they have a some type of health issue or some type of physical limitation where they need to be excused, for a doctor's appointment or what have you. So we're starting to see a lot more of those as well. But, Dr. K, I'm not sure if we're going to get into this later, but I will, since we hit on resources, I am also I'm at a small private institution, as you stated earlier, so I'm also the ADA coordinator, and usually at some larger institutions, that's a different person. But even with resources and ADA and accessibility services works hand in hand, we need to ensure that we have the wheelchair ramps are functioning properly, that the elevators are functioning properly. These are not necessarily accommodations, but these are things that need to be in place that go with accommodations.
Awesome. And so,
Dr. K,
yeah.
I apologize. Do you mind if I just piggyback a little bit on Mrs. Tuma? I think that she brings up some really great points in terms of maintenance of our institutions. And I think that when institutions are thinking about doing new construction, making sure they're making improvements to the physical environment of our universities and colleges, that they also are very strategic about thinking about broadly on access. For example, Mrs. Tuma, Dr. Tuma, soon to be, she indicated that there could be more to be done with individuals who have hearing or visual impairments. Those interpreters can be very expensive. They charge by the hour, including travel and so forth. But when institutions are doing their master planning, they could think about in classrooms providing those running scrolls so that when the instructor is in front of the class, everything that he or she is saying is then being typed across a screen. That can also be helpful for individuals who might have some hearing limitations. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be a need for an interpreter, but it will certainly make it easier for some individuals who have some issues with reading, who may also need some assistance with hearing. And so it takes really the entire university and college village to make sure that access as broadly as it is defined is actually achieved. It's going to take everybody.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. And which kind of moves us into this next conversation in terms of how accessibility services is situated on your campus. And when I say that, meaning the physical location of the office, in terms of organizational flow, is under student affairs, academic affairs, human resources, etc. So can you all talk to me about where it's situated on your campuses and where, you would prefer it to be situated if it's not, etc. So can you talk around that, especially as it relates to going back to Lori, what you said is everybody's responsibility?
So, currently our offices are located not in the best location. It's in a very busy area next to, I think, our Office of Financial Aid, and there's some issues. And the reason why I say that is because there's an underlying thing between K-12 and higher ed that I'm not going to go into. But K-12, when a student has a disability, everybody's involved, right? You've got the parents, you've got a whole team, and they decide. At the collegiate level, it is the student's right to divulge and not to divulge, right? So in the placement of your office should be in a discrete place, right? That's something that's really big. And, but that goes into the point of when doing the master planning, having the people who know about disability rights and accessibility, having them at the table to discuss those things. So that's what, and even we're currently in student affairs, which, everyone has different models, some are in other areas, but under student affairs, obviously there's some strengths with it being there in terms of programming and resources, while some institutions might have it elsewhere, but that's a huge thing. And I think we're probably going to get into the conversation of the legality, the overall legality of these things, because that to me is the biggest point about all this, is that what people do not realize is how much of a tinderbox your institution can be in regards to accessibility and having things in place correctly.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get to that.
Okay.
Other thoughts in regards to how accessibility services is situated on your campus?
So again, I'm at a small private HBCU, and we are housed under academic affairs. Physically, there is not an accessibility office. I am located in one building, and then the program manager who assists, and I keep emphasizing small private HBCUs, so we wear multiple hats and have multiple roles. So our program manager, she assists with other areas, and she's on another side of campus. And because her office is in a building without an elevator, when documents are needed to be sent, the students come over to my office because it is more readily and easily accessible. So I'm glad that we are talking about that, because before our prep session, I have to be honest, I didn't think about that, but we want our students to have some type of privacy or confidential space so they could come and share our thoughts. And then we also want to make sure that it's accessible, that it's not in an area without an elevator, or if the elevator's not working, or that it's, you know, in some dark, dank, you know, basement. We want to make sure that it is accessible for those who need it. So I'm glad that we are again having this conversation. But again, our office is housed in accessibility, or in academic services, academic affairs. And I want to say that I'm in a unique situation because we have early college students. So those are juniors, seniors, and then we also have something called super seniors. So those young persons are able to take classes on our campus, and we also provide accommodations for them. And it is a process, and it probably could be a whole nother position, because those students who have IEPs and 504 plans, I have to meet with the early college liaison. I have to meet with their parents and guardians. I have to meet with their instructors, and this could be on a monthly or even a bi-weekly basis. And then also we have a end of the year evaluation, and then we also have when they get ready to graduate, whether they stay at St. Aug or go to another institution. So it is very tedious, but I enjoy working with these young people and their families, and I take pride, even if they again don't come to my institution. I already know whether they choose to attend college in state or out of state, I'm already looking up the accessibility services contact so that I can provide that for those families. And they believe that's extremely helpful.
Yeah. And so most of the conversation has been around, at least in my perspective, around academic, right? And so let's move into the conversation of what is accessibility? What does it look like outside the classroom, or particularly student affairs? So when you're thinking about, you know, student activities, Greek life, campus reg, you know, all of those entities that normally fall under student affairs, what should we be thinking about as student affairs professionals as it relates to accessibility outside the classroom?
I think that you should consider all parts of human life, basically, on a college campus. And as far as dining services, you have to be cognizant of that. Not every student is able to eat in the cafeteria. There are some people who have some very, very rare conditions that require very specialized diets and very specialized meals. So when you're considering having programming, make sure that you're having some options that might be, for example, fruit or vegetables in just basic water, because not everyone is able to enjoy the sweets that many of us do. And so you have to kind of think about programming from that aspect. You definitely don't want to make sure anyone has anything to eat, and then that causes an allergic reaction, because then that opens up a whole nother level. But then when you're thinking about programming on a larger scale, you want to be as inclusive as you can be. You don't want to marginalize students who already feel as though they may have some second class status by being on a campus with some learning condition or health diagnosis. And so you want to be as broad and think as broadly as you can, and talking to people like Dr. Felix, Mrs. Tuma, to make sure that you are thinking about those things. You want individuals with disabilities to participate in student leadership activities and be student leaders. And we really need to ask our students, what is it that you want? Where do you want to be engaged? And let's see if we can't start plugging and be more intentional about plugging those students who we may know who has a disability, and plugging them into appropriate leadership positions.
Yeah, I especially love the latter part, is how do we engage those students that may have some disabilities, and encouraging them to take on some of these student leadership roles, right?
Absolutely.
Because your student government association, whoever's your top leader, should be reflective of the student body, right? And so the best way to do that is to understand who is the student body, and how do we navigate to those spaces that we normally don't, to say, hey, you're a part of this community. We know that you may feel marginalized because of this disability, but you still have an opportunity to lead. How can we get you on the ballot? So being intentional about those conversations. What are some other thoughts around or strategies that we can be utilizing in student affairs as it relates to accessibility outside the classroom?
I think, and one of the things that I found speaking to just administrators is sometimes this whole topic seems a little daunting.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't necessarily have to have a whole degree in accessibility to be able to do some of these things, but I understand the nature to be kind of a little wary. You have somebody on your campus who 9 times out of 10, that person, that office is stressed out and overworked in terms of trying to tackle this topic for the whole campus. So I suggest is to meet with them and find out. And the reason why I always do that is it's not all common sense. It's not like, okay, I'm going to be really, I'm going to make sure this is completely accessible. Knowing how to do that and finding out some tips, go talk to the professionals. And a quick example is, had a professor who was really thinking they were doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they knew they had students in their class who had accommodations, but they didn't specifically submit accommodations for that particular activity. So he asked all the students, hey, please raise your hand, all of you who have a disability, right? It's a huge no-no.
Wow.
But his intention was, he was like, hey, we're about to do this activity. I know that you guys would probably, but it's up to the student to exercise what they want to do, right? Mm-hmm. So even singling them out was something that, I'm pretty sure hindsight, he thinks like, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. But at that moment, he was thinking, this is great. So if you're doing an activity, you don't want to sit there and say like, hey, everyone who has a disability here, we have this alternative text thing that you could look at over here. Like, like why don't you guys form a line over here, be separate, and people could possibly do that. So please tap on the experts so that they can help you organize and develop that kind of programming. And it's fine, because after a while, if you keep doing that and you get this whole idea of universal access, you'll be able to figure out things on your own. But in the beginning, please utilize those individuals on that campus. So.
Yeah, and what you're saying, Dr. Felix, brings about the concept of a sense of belonging. And, we're at HBCUs, and we know we were founded because Blacks weren't given the opportunity to be educated. back in the 1800s. And so to be, and when I'm talking from a sense of majority of our HBCUs have a student population of African-American students, right? And you have that community, but then even within that, there's some differences, right? And so we have to move from just looking at our students from face value to really understanding the intersecting identities that make them who they are, so that they can be their one authentic self and be their best self on our campuses. And that requires us as staff to be educated on different policies and procedures and trends that are going on, and being committed to that work, even though it may not be written in our job description. So thank you for that.
Dr. K, if I may really quickly, just to add to this. So I have two things. I have a friend, colleague who came to me that was interested in applying for a position in a student accessibility services office. And he was just asking me about some tips or some advice. And the advice I gave him, I'm actually going to take it and use it in my institution, because I know that as professionals, we're Zoomed out, we're meeting out, we are on all these committees, but like Attorney Davis and Dr. Felix said, or were suggesting, why don't we have some type of committee with these students, whether they have, because and we need to realize that all challenges are not visible. You know, we have some challenges or limitations that we call invisible. They're more mental health challenges. But if there was some type of committee, these students would be able to bring their voices to the table, because a lot of times as professionals, we make decisions for our students we have good intentions, but without bringing their voices to the table. So if there was some type of committee, I think those students could ensure that, yes, we can still have spring fling, and we can, excuse me, still have bouncy houses and all this type of stuff and field days, but there will be more activities in those field days that will be more inclusive for all parties, not just those who have physical limitations, but they're just, you know, everybody will be more inclusive. And this is not bashing student activities. I love field days. I actually participated in one yesterday. It was National Student Athlete Day, or even sometimes our RTC programs have obstacle courses. Those are still good activities, but is there a way that we can be more inclusive of all of the students on our campuses?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, for me, working in assessment, that's a big one. That we're getting student voices. And like you said, we are in the positions to make the decisions. And it is, in my opinion, a shame to make decisions for students that we don't even know. And so it's always important to take an assessment of your students to see who they are, what they're bringing to campuses. If we don't have, and someone mentioned before, you know, understanding who's coming to campus, I'd rather have the services readily available and not need them than for students to start coming. And I'm looking all over the place, deer in the headlight, trying to figure out how I'm accommodate for the student before they begin to go to social media or transfer out. So bringing students to the table that utilize some of these services within accessibility services to kind of help form how we do things is really important, especially in the student affairs space, because that's our whole niche, is to ensure that our students are engaged and involved when they're not in the classroom. So thank you for bringing that point. And so let's tap into assessment. What does assessment look like within accessibility services? And so, you know, not just, you know, surveys, et cetera, but how are you all assessing these services? And some of the examples we noted in our prep talk was lack of support, personnel, and physical, which you all have kind of leaned to earlier on. Are we assessing accessibility services? That should be the question, huh? Who wants to kick us off with that?
Attorney Davis, you're muted.
Thank you so much, Dr. Felix. You know, I think that's a very good question, Dr. K. One of the things that I have found as being engaged in accessibility services is that we are trying to make sure we're serving the students in terms of making sure accommodations are there. We are doing our committee work. We are there to handle concerns or issues that students and professors bring to us. And I don't think we are really doing the type of actual assessment that is really required. I know that I followed my students and I sent early alerts. I did those kinds of things. I did surveys, but I think really doing some good assessment, I think for me, I would have benefited from working with your counterpart and really starting off identifying what do we need to assess and how do we do that? And let's make sure we are making time to do it. And I think that what we have found is that there is a lack of funding overall. I think that I could have used at least another 4 or 5 individuals on my team, and I already had a team of 6.
Wow.
And so, because the students keep coming,
Mhm.
and we know that there are students who are really needing our services, who for whatever reason are saying that they're going to wait, or they don't want to be labeled, or they're concerned about, having accessibility conversations with professors. And so now, the more we talk about it and the more we're normalizing it, students are coming to us. And as they come to us, we need to process and help them. And all of that lends itself to a need for more staff who are able to be responsive and to be able to share information with faculty on best practices. And so I will turn it over to my other colleagues because they have some additional things that they would like to share in terms of assessment as well.
I just want to echo Attorney Davis. I definitely, again, I said it earlier, it's myself and a program manager who her services are divided amongst other departments on campus. So I definitely, just speaking for my institution, can use more personnel because you have accommodations, you have training for faculty and staff and other administrators. You have a programmatic aspect that we want to bring awareness, for Disability Awareness Month or Disability Awareness Week. There's so many different areas in accessibility services that need the attention of more than just one person.
Right.
And lack of support, I'm trying to see how I want to address this. So I feel that, and this is a general statement, accessibility services, whether it's housed in student affairs or academic affairs, we're kind of pushed to the side until something happens. And when that something happens, that can cause a legal issue that's very expensive, and we want to avoid that. So I feel that accessibility services, just like any other department in those areas, should be brought to the forefront so we don't have to scrounge around and run around once something happens. So we definitely need support from the top, whether that's the provost or the VPSA or the president, the board of trustees, whomever, the support. And definitely the support in the form of money would help so that we can fund these different programs so that we can hire more personnel. But also with the ADA coordinator, I spoke about this a little bit earlier, assessing the actual physical campus. Attorney Davis spoke briefly about deferred maintenance. That deferred maintenance, majority of that probably falls under the ADA compliance or under accessibility services, however it's housed. So that's, again, the elevators, the wheelchair ramps, the buttons on the doors, the sidewalks. Do we have enough spaces for those? Do we have enough handicap spaces? Do we have enough van spaces? Do we have enough restrooms on campus? Or, all those things encompass making sure that the institution is ADA compliant, and that's just physically assessing the campus, not necessarily, and that's me using assessment in another term, but I definitely think we could do a better job of assessing our services because, again, we're not asking the students, you know, are these services enough? The students are just using what we have, but maybe they require something else. So maybe we could do some type of survey or questionnaire just to start the assessment piece. I know, again, assessment is bigger than surveys, but I feel that we need to start somewhere.
Yeah, thank you for that. Dr. Felix, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I'm gonna try to keep this simple because I think we talked about this before. The whole idea of assessment and, you know, looking at lack of support, any entity, organization, government, or whatever, look at their budgets. Their budgets will tell you what their mission is. And you will often find at every institution, funding for accessibility is not on the top priority. That's not an HBCU thing. That's in higher ed. That's our society. This is the 30th year, or last year, or I think it was, or this year was the 30th year of the ADA. And there's still so much disparities. One of the things that, while we have this great presentation, I always like to really slam home this thing that your institution, I promise you, is one complaint from being sued. Whenever I say that, a lot of times people get that, you know, the eyebrow up in the air and say, yes. Right now, you can go to the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, look under their reading room, or they have all the litigations, and they'll tell you all the findings, and they'll break down the case of what the complaint was from a student, what the institution didn't do, and what the institution had to turn around and do, right? This is aside from the civil findings that can happen in court with financial dollars. This is also just breaking down. You will go through there and see and say, oh my goodness, my institution is doing that right now, right? The physical access, those laws have been in place since like the 70s, 78. They've gotten strengthened, they've strengthened over time. But think about your institution. And for small institutions that may not have, you know, funding for construction and to do repairs, think about and look around and to see how many cracks you have, or how many buildings they may not be completely accessible, right? How many elevators are dilapidated. These are all things that can bring an immediate lawsuit, right? And so when we talk about assessing, part of what your institution is doing when they're assessing, even if it's not required by your accreditation, you should be looking at what is the accessibility to the areas on campus, what is the academics, what's in terms of the design, do we have an alternative format to provide? Surprisingly, with COVID, for all of us who are still operating, COVID has forced everyone to take all of their on-ground teaching and put it online, all right? That's half the battle, to be honest with you. That's a big thing. The other half is getting people to be trained. And I say all that to say, we have a lack of assessment because we have a lack of funding. And we have a lack of funding because a lot of times we have a lack of interest in this area. And what I do want to say, my last thing is, you go to the OCR, look at those schools who had findings against them, and now go back to their website and look to see what they have in place for their accessibility.
Yeah, I think that's, can you restate where they can go to find those
Yes.
items?
The U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, and they have different units that they investigate, but they have one specifically for disability services and complaints. And unlike a student who might have a problem with a grade in the class, these students, if they have a problem with their accommodations or they feel like they're being treated unfairly, they can go straight to the federal government to make a complaint. And so that's, to me, that's a big takeaway, because you know, there needs to be having more conversations about this.
Yeah, exactly. And so as we're coming to an end, if we can probably wrap up in about 3 minutes before we open up for Q&A. Thinking about accessibility service in the HBCU culture, and what would be, if you can give me one call to action that you want to give to HBCUs professionals that are working as it relates to accessibility services?
I would suggest universities universal design principles and working with academic affairs, student affairs, all of the component pieces in both of those large organizational structures on campus to really hit home on the importance of inclusion of all of our students. And if our students are included, they succeed. And when our students succeed, our institutions succeed. And so universal design principles can be for learning, it can be for student engagement. And one of the resources that I have used in the past and shared with student affairs, other student affairs colleagues and academic affairs colleagues are information from University of Washington's Do It Center. And they have a whole range of knowledge-based papers and just short, quick reads to help get you up to speed on some of these issues so that you can start to discuss them and become an ally so that we can be more responsive to all of our students and uplift our institutions in the process.
Thank you. Thank you. That's awesome. Mrs. Tuma, Dr. Felix, your call to action?
I like to think of myself as a boots on the ground junior administrator. Dr. Felix used a key word, interest, and I feel like I have the best interest of all of my students. But listening to their concerns, I think that our institutions, we need to think about accessibility services from start to finish. Are our websites up to date? Marketing and communications, are those images inclusive of our student, all of our students, or just our student leaders that we continuously use over and over? When the students are admitted to the university, do we send out information? Who's the director of accessibility services? Who's that contact point? Where do I send my 504 plan or my IEP? Then going to orientation, is there someone to receive my information that you all have requested? If it's virtual, is there some type of information mentioned about accessibility services in orientation? Once there, the students arrive, have the students who have completed all the paperwork, is there a set time when they can meet the accessibility services staff persons? Are there semesterly or quarterly reminders about turning in pertinent documentation? So I just feel that we, and now that I'm talking about it, like, yes, accessibility services or retention is connected to, or accessibility services is tied to retention. We want to make sure that we're retaining all of our students, but some of our students who do come to see us for services, they leave because things aren't maintained, or, you know, paperwork wasn't turned in, or my instructors don't have my accommodation letters, and, you know, just all these concerns. So I just think as a culture, we just need to make sure that we are making sure that our students have the resources they need from the time they think about applying until graduation.
Awesome.
The
Thank you.
only thing I would add to that is with everything that Ms. Tuma described from the beginning to the end, my call to action would be to challenge HBCUs to go beyond that. Our HBCUs historically have been prideful in being a haven for those who couldn't access education elsewhere, right? So then go beyond that. Go beyond providing all these resources. Go to the point of recruiting students with disabilities. Go to the point of making your institution not just, oh, they provide accommodations, but they're welcoming students with disabilities, and they're recruiting those individuals. Let that be part of your institution's mission. That takes a lot of strategic planning up at the top, but why not?
Right.
These students, when you give them the proper resources, they excel at the same rate or even better than your regular students. So why not?
Yeah.
That's my call to charge and my challenge to all HBCUs.
Wow. Well, after all of that, I want to give honor to Dr. Felix and Lori, for your businesses that you have where you dedicate some of your business, if not all, to accessibility services. And so definitely want to highlight you all in regards to that. And we will, I found a way to include on when we repost this to include your website so that individuals can access that. So I want to give honor to your businesses that you have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now, what questions do we have from our attendees? Are there any questions or comments? Please utilize the Q&A chat. And so we'll do Q&A for about 5 minutes. If you have any questions, please put those in the chat box or the Q&A section. So any questions or comments that you may have? And while we're waiting for any of those to pop up, I just want to personally thank you all for your time and your space and the work that you do at our institutions around accessibility services. And like I said in the beginning, this is a topic that's not widely discussed beyond just those doing the work, but it needs to be because our students are ever changing and the way they learn and navigate our campuses are different. And so we need to be abreast to not only the policies and procedures that are in place, but how do we think beyond? And like Dr. Felix says, how do we go beyond just what our mission says, but how do we get to that point of, I love what you said in regards to recruiting, actually pinpointing them, those that have disabilities and actually recruiting them to be come to our campuses. And so we do have a question, one question, are there any new laws we need to be aware of? Any new laws we need to be aware of?
I don't think that there are any that are new. Obviously, there's the ADA and the amendments that have occurred with that. You have to also be familiar with the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and some amendments to that. Each individual state may also have some laws that specifically relate to access, and you need to follow those. Here in Kentucky, we do have some accessibility statutes that we need to be apprised of. And I think each state needs to make sure that, or each HBCU or institution in your state, you just need to make sure that you are availing yourself of all of the statutes that are implicated as it relates to access on your campuses. There may be some specific nuances, could be textbook accessibility as it is in Kentucky. There could be some other nuanced particular state statutes that are relevant.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Any other questions or comments? All right. Any last words or statements from our panelists?
I have really enjoyed having the opportunity to talk about accessibility. I don't think it is talked about enough. You can tell from Dr. Felix and Mrs. Tuma and our conversation that we are very committed to the success of all of our students, and particularly those who we work with on a day-to-day basis. We want to amplify their voices and amplify their status as a student just as any other. And it seems to me that we can do a better job across the board in higher education in terms of communicating among and between, from the top, from the Board of Regents, boards of trustees, all the way down to everyone who works at the institution, to make sure we are including our students who may have some differences. And, you know, if we have all of our voices at the table, then that makes us a richer college environment. And thank you very much, Dr. K, for allowing me to be a participant.
My pleasure.
My final statement, and thank you so much too for bringing this topic up. Yes, we do not talk about this enough, and every opportunity that I have, I try to scream about it. What I would like to tell everyone who is listening, please find your local accessibility specialist on campus and give them a hug and ask them, what can I do to help you? Because they will accept any help with anybody trying to champion this cause. It's a lonely job, and some of us, like Ms. Tuma, has several different hats, and any help that we can get with spreading the word or helping with training and just awareness on our campus. It is really one of those professions that should be like your teaching certification. It should be in every single toolbox for every professor, every administrator. So please find them, hug them, and ask them if you could help them.
Thank you for that. Awesome. Mrs. Tuma?
Yes, Dr. K, really quickly, I'm thankful for you and thankful for allowing us to participate. I think Attorney Davis and Dr. Felix were reading my mind, because I do share those same sentiments. Accessibility services is not hard work. I think it's hard work. You have to be passionate about it, because we're always championing for our students in all of our meetings across campus, whether it's a board meeting or student orientation, just all types of meetings. We're championing to make sure that we have the financial resources, that we have the personnel, that all of our student voices are being heard. So I'm just thankful to be in this space, and to be able to learn from my colleagues as this is a teaching moment, but also it's a learning moment for me. So I'm just appreciative. Thank you.
Dr. K,
Yeah.
may I have one more thing to say?
Okay.
Please caption your videos. Turn the captions on as they play, please.
Yes. And we failed to do that for this one, right? But moving forward, definitely taking that into consideration and practicing that. So thank you for that. Once again, thank you all for tuning in. If you're replaying this, thank you for replaying it. Share with a colleague. This is considered professional development for you all. Thank you to my panelists. Thank you to NASPA. Thank you to NASPA Region 3 for the opportunity to conduct such a series around HBCUs and the different topics as related to higher education. Our next webinar is April 21st, and we are talking about barriers facing underrepresented minorities from an HBCU perspective. And so I hope to see you there. Make sure you register. You can register through the NASPA Region 3 website. Until then, peace and blessings to you all.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Enjoyed the panel.